I'm John Nord, and thanks for tuning in to my Spur series. Today I'm going to work on the shanks for the Marfa shank spurs. This is my brass pattern for the shank. It has a unique shank to these spurs. But I'm just trying to teach the way I make spurs, not specifically this one. I have a half-inch thick piece of 1018 steel here, and I've colored the surface of it with dichem, and then I took my pattern and I've laid it on here and I've scribed around it, and I'm going to take this over to my bandsaw and start cutting it out. It takes a while to cut these half-inch shanks out with a bandsaw, but that's the way I was taught, and that's the way we're going to do it. So thanks. Stay with me. One thing I want to say is cut just outside your lines. Don't get too close to the line. You have to have room to file these down. This is the finished size of the shank, so I'm going to cut just outside the line so I can file it back to shape and be right on the line. With these bandsaws, you just start working your way around just outside the line. You have to make several cuts different ways. Some bandsaws you can put an 1/8 inch blade on. Mine will only hold down to 1/4, and it doesn't hold that very well. But anyway, you just start cutting all around these lines till you get them both pieces cut out. Then you'll file them down to shape to the scribed lines. Okay, I got both shanks cut out. These are rough cuts by the pattern. We're going to take them over here and start filing on them, get them right down to the right shape by our brass pattern that we have. One thing you want to remember when you're filing is to keep this all flat, straight across, and you can watch these little dark spots here. That means if you have a shiny spot all the way around it, that means that that's down low. But and as long as that works in together small, you're going flat across there. Another trick is to take a black magic marker and mark lines across here like a checkerboard, and that will tell you, that'll give you a guide like a graph on whether you're staying flat or not. You just keep working it until you get it shaped all the way around to the lines. This takes some patience and some time, but it'll all be worth it. You'll have a perfect shank for the right size. And of course, you're going to take down the thickness of it over time, but this is getting the perfect outside line on it. Okay, the last thing you do after I've got them all filed, and the last thing I do is I put them down right next to each other and I see if there's any differences. I had a little bit of difference over here on the tips, and I've corrected that already. You can see one more difference here. This one's a little bit longer than that one, and the pattern fits this one, so I'm going to file that down right there on the end a little. Okay, we've got that corrected. We're real close now. Everything looks good all over. The last thing you want to do is match it up to your pattern. See if you're all in uniform, which it is pretty much. It's a little bit, the shank's a little bit larger than the pattern, but after I polish everything down and all, it'll be right in the money. The next thing is to get these on the bands, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, now I'm going to show you how I put the shanks on my spur bands, and I do it a little different from other people. Anyway, this is the way I like to do it. I have this hole that we put in the band earlier to press it or to bend the band. And normally, if you were just going to put the shank on here and weld it, you would put a rod in here and then you'd weld up that hole. But what I do is I use that hole. And I'm going to take the shank and I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to mark the hole on the shank to where it's exactly centered. And then I'm going to drill a hole in the shank right here. I'm going to take a piece of 3/16 rod. I'm going to put it into that hole, stake it real good where it won't come out. And then I'm going to have these edges around here where I'm going to weld. I'm going to have them knocked down at an angle so I can get a good bead around there. And I'm going to put this with the pin in it onto the band, and I'm going to brad it right here. I've got that countersink where I can brad it. And then that's got the shank on the band. Then I'll proceed to weld around it all the way, and then I'll have to do some filing to knock the bead back flush with a definite line. The Martha shank spur has a definite line around here, so I'm going to file that all down, which is a lot of work to get it exactly right, but I'm going to file this down to get a fine line around there, and so then it'll be welded and braided. And I just like to do my spurs that way. I do nearly all of them that way. So I'm going to go ahead and get these knocked down and the pin in it and everything, and then I'll show you before I put it on the band how it looks and how it goes on there. Okay, I've got this shank prepared here to put on the band. You can see I drilled a hole dead center of there, and I put this 3/16 pin in it, and I staked it. That keeps it in there. I've also filed down the weld edges so I can, when I weld my bead and then file it back to the line, I'll still have plenty of bead burned in there. I've got my band taped up here, so when I go bradding in here, I won't scar it up too bad. And then I'll put this on here. I'll tap it on there. Put me some tape right here. There we go. And then you can see the the rod's just coming out through the hole there. So I'll brad this down, and then I'll make sure you can move this shank just a little bit left to right, make sure it's dead center, and then we'll get in here and weld it around here and get it on there. Shank looks good. I've got her bradded in there, and right on the center there. We'll take all this tape off. We didn't do much scarring on it. You can see how it's in there. Looks like it's pretty much right on the center. We can adjust it just a little bit. Anyway, now we're going to get over here and we're going to weld this up around here. I have a pacemaker and I shouldn't be TIG welding, so I have to MIG weld these, and I've been able to MIG weld with no trouble. So the ideal thing though to do is to TIG weld it if you have that capability. It's a lot less trouble. If you only have an arc welder, you can do it with an arc welder too. I started out with that. A MIG welder's a little bit easier, but a TIG welder's way better. But I have to MIG weld them. Anyway, we'll get that done in here, and then I'll show you how to grind it down to make it look right. Okay, I'm fixing to weld this shank on. I put my jig that you saw earlier when I was bending this band back in my vise, and I've clamped it up at the front here. I've put some shields on there to keep from scarring it, and then I've got a center mark on that. I don't know if you can see it right there, but I make sure that the shank's dead center even though it's bradded on, and I put a piece of angle iron back here, and I'm gonna clamp it right there to keep it stable while I tack weld. I'm going to put 2 heavy tacks on it, one on each side, and then I'll take it out of here and I'll finish welding it. Now I've put some MIG grease on some of the surfaces of the spur to keep pieces of the weld from sticking to the fresh ground surfaces. Anyway, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you here. I've got them welded all the way around, and I put a pretty heavy bead around there, and you have to, because when you go grinding them, if you don't have enough bead on these, you'll grind back and have not enough metal to grind back to your line and make it look right. So you have to put a pretty good bead around them. It looks like a mess right now, but once we get the file after them and get them dressed down, well, they'll look good. Hi, I'm John Nord, and I'm continuing this series. The last scene there, we had welded the spur shanks onto the bands, and this is what they looked like at that time. From this point is one of the harder things for me to show you on a video, because It's a lot of filing, takes a lot of time, and a lot of patience, because this Marfa shank has fine lines cut around the shank. A lot of spurs are blended in like this in a curve, and those to me are a little easier to file because you're just blending it in. But when you have a fine line, you've got to be careful not to take out too much material on your band, not get into the material on the shank, and just file you a clean line around that shank. And on this Marfa, this shank actually stops right here, and you got a little step down right here, so we've got to file that in there. So I use a couple or three different methods for doing this, and first of all, I want to get this glaze off of this weld, you know, like the hard surface of the weld. I want to get that off of there so my file will cut it easily. Sometimes, probably all the time, these welds are real hard, and when you go trying to file them, your file will just kind of skip over them. But I cut the surface down to where I start seeing the metal shine up, and that allows the file to cut faster. And I do that with, sometimes I use a grinder, a handheld grinder with a thin disc on it, metal cutting disc, and I'll just work right in here around that, being careful not to get into the band or the shank. And sometimes I use a bench mounted grinder that I can stand here, and I can just start cutting on the edges around it. Then again, you have to still be real careful not to get into your band or your shank. But anyway, I just kind of, when I use this, I just kind of start taking that glaze off of there and getting down into the metal. You can go ahead and take a little bit more metal off than that. If I'm using this, I just use this. And I'll do that. I just sit here working around that. Some people use a chop saw, and they'll sit there and work it on that chop saw. Some people use the belt sander. I find that a little more difficult at this stage because the belt tries to round everything, and it doesn't, you're actually just cutting on the side of the belt. But now there's probably a lot of belt sanders out there different from mine, and I believe I've used a couple of them in some schools that would cut that down real nice with a smaller belt. And I'm sure there's a lot of spur makers that have a lot more ideas than me on this, but this is how I've done it. I'm a little limited on all my tools. I don't have the high dollar stuff, but I make do, and that's why I wanted to make some of these videos, to show you that you can do with less if you have to. Okay, this spur here, took the glaze off the welds, and I've started filing on it. You can see I've started getting my lines going here. Got this step down going, and I've got it going flat this way, and I've got to do the other side over here more. But anyway, when you get to that stage, I just work it with the file and back and forth. It takes a lot of patience and time, and I just blend that all to a fine line, blend this weld back into the band, back into the shank, and then have my fine line around the shank. So that's what I'm doing now. And once I get these finished up, I'll show you what I've got. And then we'll get it on the belt sander and we'll start polishing this all out real nice. And we'll march on with this project. Okay, I got these filed. I got a good line around them. They're not finished up. I've got to get them here on the belt sander, but I've got the beads cut back and the shanks are still the right width and everything. The bands are flush up. So next step is to put them on the belt sander and start trying to clean them up a little better. I'm going to do that next. Okay, I got this one cleaned up around the shank pretty well. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to taper this shank. I like to taper my shanks just like I do the bands, from thick to a little bit thinner at the back. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, next, like I told you, we're going to taper the shank, and to do that we'll do it over on the belt sander. But there's one thing you need to do before you even go to that point, and that's to drill this rowel pin hole right here, and you do that according to whatever rowel you're going to put in it. Determine where that pin needs to be. And I've just drilled it with an 1/8 inch hole right now. Later I'll drill that out to 3/16 and countersink it for my riveting or whatever I'm going to do there. But anyway, you want to drill that while this shank is straight and flat. So when you put it on your drill press, it's sitting flat and you get that hole straight through. It's real important to get that hole straight through the shank. And then I coat the shank with the blue dichrome to make it dark. And then I mark off a 1/16 of an inch from this side and a 1/16 from this side. This is a 1/2 inch shank, and I want the outside out here to be 3/8 when I get through tapering it. And then I mark a slanted line from the tip back about 1 3/4 inches back here, and slowly taper out to full width up here in the curve. So it's going to be like this, like a slant towards the back. And that's how I was taught to do spurs, and I really like that look, and I like that to not be so thick at the back where the rowel is. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to move over here to the belt sander and get this tapered down. when you're sanding this, make sure you keep it flat. You can watch your pattern here to make sure it's going to be flat. Okay, I got one side done. Now I'm gonna move over here and do the other side. And then I'll show you what we got. Okay, we've got both sides done. And you can see the taper in there. How it's narrow down here and blows out wide up here. And the pattern's smooth on both sides. So that means we got a good flat grind on it. So, next thing we're going to do, I've already marked the center line here. I'm going to check that again, and then we're going to move over here and split this shank for our rowel. Okay, there's a lot of discussion on how you should split a shank on a spur. I know a lot of guys do it with their bandsaw. And it takes a jig and it takes a really good bandsaw to not mess your shank up. You have to make a couple of cuts up in there, and they have to be straight from top to bottom. And a lot of guys do that real well, and it takes a better bandsaw than what I have. I've got a homemade bandsaw and a homemade belt sander, and I have to do with what I got, but I like my tools, and that's why I make these videos, to show you some different ways of doing things. But anyway, I used to split all my shanks with a chop saw, and it's pretty dangerous. The chop saw blades, or the chop saws, have a lot of horsepower, and if you're standing there holding them spurs and you don't keep the angle just right, well, the chop saw can yank the spur out of your hands and toss it back at you, or toss it across the room, whatever. And the blades can come apart. Even with protective gear, it can get dangerous. So I found another way of splitting the shank that's worked really well for me, and pretty quick and very accurate. I haven't messed up a spur yet with it. It don't really take any more time, I don't think. And let me show you here. I've got this little grinder, and these grinders are fairly cheap. You can use any grinder, Makita is any of them. And I just made me a wood jig to hold it here on the bench real steady, and a rubber strap that pulls down and goes over a bolt to hold it in place. And I've got a cutter wheel on the end of it, and you want to get good cutter wheels. Don't buy any cheap ones, but get good cutter wheels. And I've got the shank here. It's been tapered, got my hole drilled in it. I've got a center line marked on it, and I just stand here and I hold this. And of course you've got to watch these too, because if you get them in the wrong position, they can try to yank it out of your hand too. But they're a lot less powerful, so a lot less danger. And you want to wear eye protection, gloves, and a mask. And I just sit here and I simply cut the slot on this with this cutter blade as it's moving. I stand here and I just keep cutting until I get up to where I've marked that I need to be with the rowel I'm using, which is about right here. You can see the center mark and where it stops at. And I cut up to there. And of course these blades are thinner than what my rowel is. So I cut up to there, and then I use another cutter blade to sit there, and I can use this a little bit and use that, and I can get that slot widened out to where my rowel fits it just right. They make wider cutter blades, but this one's the fastest, and I like to get it done and just go in there and finesse the slot there to where everything fits right. So I'll show you just how I stand here to do this, and you can and also you want to have a bucket of water handy to cool it off as you're doing this. Okay, you can see how I've got the cut started there, and you can kind of move it back and forth and keep that slot wide, but you'll still have to go in there and file it out a little bit with another disc. And what I do there is I just go in there with this one, and I sit here and I hold it, and you can control this real easy, and I just move it around a little bit until I get that slot the right width. Okay, here's one I've already finished up, and you can see the slot in it here, and I think it's just the right width, but before you put the rowel in it, once you put the rowel in it and spin it and everything, you can tell whether it's the right width or not, and you can widen it out a little bit further if you need to. This is my pattern rowel. I haven't made the rowels yet, but this is the pattern rowel. It's a 1.5 inch rowel, and you can put it in here, and I'm just putting an 1/8 inch bit through here because I haven't, this hole's supposed to be 3/16 and I haven't drilled it out yet. Anyway, you can see how the rowel will look in there once it's in there. You can see I've got plenty of room in my slot. This is going to be just right on this one, and that's how we cut the slots in them. Okay, that's the end of my part 2 of my Spur series, and the next in part 3 I'm going to show you how to cut out the rowels and get them filed and ready to go in the Spur, and then we'll have a part 4 where we're going to polish the Spur up real nice and everything before I engrave it. That it'll be polishing. It'll be also putting the hangers into the Spur, and putting our rowels in, putting the swingers on, and those things that are needed to finish the Spur up.